According to the internet, the number of books written about Abraham Lincoln is 15,000. Someday there may be a lot of books about Christie, but so far there's only one. It came out this month. It's called Christie, The Inside Story of His Rise to Power, and it's written by my State House colleagues Bob Ingle and Michael Symons, who are our guests this week. Good of you to come in.
Thank you.
You're promoting a book. Of course you would come in.
Yes, we're on book tour right now. That's why we look like we do.
How did this book come about, Bob?
Well, The Soprano State, which was the prior book, was a tremendous success, and the publisher kept asking us to do other books. They asked us about 4 or 5 of them, and none of them interested us. And then they said, well, wait a second. Christie's star is rising. You know him. Maybe this is the one for you. So, okay, we'll give that one a shot. And Sandy McClure, who wrote Soprano State with me, enjoying her life of canoeing and hiking too much to get back in harness and write another book. So Michael and I teamed up to do this one.
Well, I liked the book, and I learned things from the book. And a friend of mine, when I was on page 80, said, what have you learned? Anything? I said, yeah, I learned that Christie's parents fought like cats and dogs. And you didn't explicitly say this or speculate, but do you think that's maybe why he's a little bit combative or combustible?
Yeah, I mean, we sort of tried to leave some of those conclusions for readers to draw on their own rather than tell them what to think. But yeah, I mean, I think that you see a lot of the way that he was raised reflected in sort of the environment that he is used to and can thrive in. I mean, they didn't see arguing things out and fighting as a sign of weakness. They did it. It was, you know, it was part of a loving relationship. You know, they weren't a weak family. They were a strong family. Whether it was because of the fighting, I have no idea. I didn't grow up quite the same way. But I think that as a result, he doesn't see arguing things out and having an opinion as a sign of weakness. You can argue things out and then the next day still be friends or still love each other.
And one of the things that came through in the book, because you go back into his ancestry a few generations, this is really a guy who came up through Newark, through working class Newark, on both sides of his family, right?
Right. When we started to write this, we thought we were going to be writing a book about a young politician who has done very well for himself in a very short period of time. But when we got into it, we found out that if you go back a couple of generations, these are people on his mother's side of the family who actually came from Italy on the boat, went by the Statue of Liberty, waved at the Statue of Liberty, took any job they could get, sometimes more than one job. And then you look what has happened. In just these 2 generations, you've got a fellow who is a successful governor by many standards that a lot of people across America want to run for president. It is the quintessential all-American story. I don't know any place in the globe where this could happen.
And I think that not only is it sort of, you know, an American story as Bob described it, but some of the details of it are also very New Jersey. I mean, to come over, have one side of your family be from Italy, the other side's from Ireland and Scotland. You're in North Jersey, in Newark in his family's case, but also Jersey City, and then you sort of move out to the outer ring suburbs. And I think that background and the way that he can talk about it helps him identify with a whole lot of people who aren't necessarily currently in his socioeconomic class.
He lives in a baronial manor home now, but he was his family was pretty poor or middle class.
Yeah, they were working class.
And even he and Mary Pat at the beginning of their marriage lived in very modest circumstances, according to your portrait.
Modest? Well, modest is putting it mildly. It was in a walk-up over a liquor store that had a half wall separating the bedroom from everything else.
Was that in Summit, or where was that?
Do you remember where that one was? Was that
Yeah,
that was
Summit.
Yeah. They lived in several different places, but it certainly was nothing like the governor's mansion, the stately governor's mansion, or the almost as stately Christie household today.
Did you go to the Christie home?
No, we didn't.
You did not.
We did talk to Mary Pat, and the way the schedule worked out was we got them wherever we could. And so when we
How
had
many different interviews with the governor?
Gosh, I don't remember altogether for the book, but you have to consider also interviews where we ran across each other at the State House and stopped in the hall and talked, plus Michael and I have been covering them for a long time, and all that fit into the book. Now, that family thing, I'm getting mail now that the book has been out a couple of weeks and people are writing us about it. I'm hearing, well, I finally figured out who I was in my family. Well, who was that? Well, I am the Todd Christie of my family. I'm the little brother who has to compete with the big guy. So I think there is something in this that we never anticipated, that people are looking at his family and seeing their own family in it.
Would you tell the story of how he got his name, Christopher Christie, briefly?
Right. Yeah, he was supposed to be named originally after his uncle, right? That's the way it was going to work. So it was going to be James Christopher, and his
James Christopher was the first name and the middle name of his uncle.
Right, and he also his uncle and aunt were expecting a child at the same time, and he wanted to use the same name, and so it sort of became a thing where the way that the governor's dad tells it is different than the way the governor does, in that they were both going to have the same name, and it was no big deal. You call Jimmy, and they both come running, no big deal. And then his dad sort of felt bad about that, said, let's kind of yield the name, and then they just switched it without really thinking about the alliterative nature of what it would turn into, until he came home and he was Christopher James, and then his grandma said, "Oh, look, it's little Chris Christie." and the governor has told this story a lot of times, even at town hall meetings, about how his mom's jaw dropped because apparently they hadn't really thought through what that would sound like later. But I think in a way it kind of winds up helping him too, because it's very memorable. Just that his name is Chris Christie. Not that we wouldn't know who the governor is anyway, but if the governor's name was Jim Christie, I don't think it doesn't quite penetrate the consciousness exactly the same way.
You write that as a boy he seemed to have a really good memory, and as I read that line, it struck me that that is probably one of the keys to his success in life, is his memory.
If you're a politician and you can remember names and conversations, it's golden.
And issues, all the stuff about public policy.
Right, and it's not only as a child he had that, he has that today.
Right.
Because we would go in and have a follow-up interview with him about the book, and he could tell us what we said to him and what he said to us 3 months prior to that. I suspect he could tell you 3 years prior to that what he said. That's golden if you're a politician.
And when we were talking to his father, his dad kind of talked about how he always thought listening was important and tried to instill that in him. And you could even see when we were interviewing Mr. Christie how he was very attentive to the questions that we were asking and things, and basically said it's respectful. If you're going to be having a conversation with somebody, be attentive, stay focused on them, wait till they're done, and then answer. And you can kind of see some of that in the governor. Sometimes he may then talk over somebody at a town hall, and that's what we had to see it on YouTube later. But he's a pretty good listener.
I know Bill Christie, his father, and we've had some nice conversations. He's a nice man.
He is.
One of the things that you do a good job of filling in is the blank of the Morris County political career. Those of us who have covered Chris Christie since he became U.S. Attorney have always known that it was kind of raucous back there in Morris County when he was a freeholder, but we didn't know many details, and you supply the details. He was involved in 3 lawsuits. He lost a re-election. He was reaching for higher office all the time. He was like a bull in a china shop, according to your portrayal, correct?
Right.
Well, whether he's dealing with Republicans or Democrats, he seems to sort of have that impact on people. Democrats in Trenton now, sort of, he drives them crazy, and he calls them names, they call him names, and the temperature's always high, it seems like. But it was the same way in Morris County, and it was people in his own party. They wanted to impose new ethics rules on what could be said in campaigns and set up tribunals, and there was constantly efforts to sort of rein in a lot of the way that he was, approaching his job. I mean, it's an all-Republican county, and he went in there wanting to make all sorts of changes and demanding that things be changed. It basically said, you're not running the county well right now, which is sort of unusual to say to other members of your own political party.
So if he were to become president, I think we've noted before in the press corps, he'd be the first president to have lost a freeholder race early in his career.
I think that's safe to say. If for no other reason, I think New Jersey is the only state where we call them freeholders. Ordinarily, we call them county commissioners or something. But
Well, county superintendents
or
out
something
in
like
California,
that.
yeah.
But you can see the Christie in him. He ran saying that he wanted to shake the place up, make some improvements, and doggone it, he got elected, and that's what he started to do. And the Morris County Republicans said, "Whoa, wait a second here. We didn't know he was really going to do this." And so they got a belly full of him, and I think they thought they had killed him politically and thrown dirt on his grave, and he was done.
And you write that he thought he was finished with elective office after losing a freeholder re-election.
Yeah, he said, well, maybe this just isn't for me.
He becomes U.S. Attorney after having raised a lot of money for George Bush, George W. Bush. There's a lot of skepticism about whether he's up to the job. He quickly dispels that by being as aggressive and clever as he was. And a fefew years later, he finds himself on the U.S. Attorney hit list being assembled in Washington by Alberto Gonzales, the U.S. Attorney General at the time. And you write considerably about that mystery. How did he get on the hit list?
Yeah, you use a good word, mystery, because even we've tried to look around into some of that, and it's still a mystery. I mean, you go through congressional testimony from later, and even interview the governor about it, and it's not entirely clear. He got on an early list, sort of.
These
on a second tier.
Just for the viewer's sake, these are people that the Bush White House wanted to fire after Bush's re-election.
Right. He wins the second term. There are 94 United States attorneys around the country, and they start to say, okay, let's replace some of them that we don't think are doing a good job or aren't loyal enough, or we want to put somebody else in that spot. For whatever reason, and it's not often done in the middle of a term. It's pretty common when a new president takes over to make wholesale changes. But that was part of why that whole episode was unusual, that it was occurring in the middle of a term and for reasons that weren't entirely clear. So at the start of the process, they had, these are the people we should do, and we should also consider these others. And Christie was on that list and then came off. And then again, toward the end, same sort of deal. He came on a list of maybe we should consider adding him. And he says that he's asked people that he doesn't know why it occurred. Congressional testimony didn't really reveal that. I kind of hope he runs for president at one point, just so that somebody will get an answer to that question. Somebody who is covering the Justice Department at that time will probably be able to drill down to that if he ever makes that run, and I look forward to that.
During his tenure as U.S. Attorney, I think you write that he had dinner with George Norcross, who had been the subject of a state investigation at a certain point, but Christie felt comfortable having dinner with the South Jersey power broker, Norcross. Their relationship ever since has been of some interest to those of us who cover all of this stuff. What do you think of their relationship? How would you characterize where they are today, for example?
George is what he is. You call him a power broker?
Power broker.
I call him a South Jersey boss in Soprano State and this book. There is no denying.
Boss is the tougher, edgier word for it, and those of us who don't want to offend him call him a power broker.
I say I'm an opinion, and you're a reporter. That's the difference. You and Mike are reporters. I can call him a boss. Okay. But anyway, the truth of the matter is he does have a great deal of influence. And if you want to get
Chris Christie?
Well, with the legislature, for instance. The people who are elected from South Jersey. And if you have a program that has to get through the legislature, then you're going to have some colleagues over there who can get it done.
We all hear that the state is really being run by three people, Chris Christie, George Norcross, and Joe DiVincenzo / Steve Adubato Sr.
Right.
Do you buy that? Do you think that they're secretly guiding the state together or not?
No, I don't think they get up in the morning and they go to some room somewhere
or call each other on the phone,
have breakfast or talk to each other and say, what are we going to do today? I think the people that you mentioned have a great deal of influence. They have worked their way to it. So I think, there has to be some understanding about what is likely to make it and what isn't. I don't think that there's this great conspiracy, though, where they talk to each other all the time.
One thing I thought was interesting at one point at a State House news conference, and I can't remember what the issue was, but Jason Method, one of our colleagues, asked Christie a question and said essentially, George Norcross now says his opinion on such an issue is such and such. What do you think? And rather than say, I'm not going to stand up here and answer the opinions of every rank and file New Jersey person, he gave a lengthy answer as to what his position on that same issue was. And I just remember watching it at that moment, saying and to kind of get back to your point, if you ever need any indication of how important Norcross is around Trenton and how everybody acknowledges that, there wasn't, I'm not going to talk about what some Democratic power broker is saying about something. No, he gave an answer like they were talking over an issue.
I think I remember that, and they seem to work together on issues like the current reorganization, the college reorganization issue.
Well, what has been important to the Christie agenda? Some of the basic principles have been shared with by Steve Sweeney, the president of the Senate, who comes from South Jersey. But Steve had some of those ideas before Christie was ever governor.
Sweeney appears to be one of the key interviews in your book to me. The key interviews were the governor, his wife, his brother, Bill Palatucci, his close friend, and I think Steve Sweeney was a key interview.
I think he was too. I agree with that. Yeah.
Their relationship has gone through some twists and turns. How do you think it is today?
Their relationship is probably, in certain ways, the Trenton personification of what we were talking about earlier, how you can argue with somebody and yell at them, but still have a friendship. I don't think Christie sees any of those individual episodes, not even just out of necessity, but I don't think he sees any of those individual episodes as a reason to cut off their relationship. I mean, he needs them in that he's the Senate president, but I mean, if they didn't have a solid relationship, some of the things that are going on with the Supreme Court, for instance, could really sever a relationship between the governor and a legislative leader. And some of the things that have been said, particularly some of the things more famously said last summer by Steve Sweeney, could really poison a relationship. But they seem to still be friends.
Although Sweeney comes across in your book as a little chastened, a little like, I got to work with this guy, but he's burned me once or twice. I'm a little more careful than I was two years ago. Yes?
I think that's probably how he feels. But I don't think that it gets to a real personal level. The political fights that they have. One of my favorite parts in the book is where after Christie has the asthma attack and he's ill, the Sweeney they weren't speaking at the time, but Sweeney's daughter had heard about the governor's illness and insisted that her dad call the governor so she could talk to him. That to me was touching.
What was great was that, and you write about it, and it's a good moment in the book, is that the governor returns the call, Sweeney answers the phone, and he says, "It's Chris, put on your daughter." And he never speaks to
That's
Sweeney.
right.
He just
That's
talks
right.
to his
I didn't call
daughter.
you, put the daughter on. Yeah, that was a nice touch, I thought.
You write about John Corzine a fair amount, I guess, because he's the foil to Chris Christie in life and in politics, or at least the contrast. And you write of Corzine, trying to be all things to all sides never works. Is that the lesson of John Corzine's?
Well,
it jumped out at me, that line.
I think he probably, well, I don't know, actually. I haven't heard from him in a while, and he doesn't call me and let me know how he feels, as you might imagine. But part of the failing of John Corzine, and I really believe he came in wanting to do good. I really do.
They all do.
Well, I think maybe more than most he wanted to do well. And the way he got into politics was not like most people do, where they start out driving somebody's car and they work their way up, and so by the time they get to one of these big positions, they really know how things are. He more or less bought himself a U.S. Senate seat, and then he did the same thing with governor, and he sort of skipped all these other parts of it that seasoned politicians have. So I think a part of what he didn't learn is if you try to be on all sides of an issue, nobody's going to be happy.
Your take on the Corzine, how Corzine comes off in your book?
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason for including a lot about Governor Corzine, well, in part, the book sort of picks up where Bob and Sandy's other book left off, which was sometime in the mid-'90s. And another reason is to understand how...
The mid-
the
mid-2000s.
mid-2000s, I apologize. But also to understand how it is that Christie got to be governor, you sort of have to understand how a Republican got elected in New Jersey in the first place. Corzine had shortcomings in connecting with the public. He had shortcomings in connecting with the legislature. And at some point, I think a political party starts to get very interested in having its own internal fights rather than sort of keeping an eye on that political prize. And he didn't have strong relationships with people in the legislature, and the whole thing sort of got adrift. And then obviously the recession hit, and incumbent political parties were losing left and right. But Corzine's problems led to why Christie could even get elected in the first place.
I was struck by your stuff on his staff and what a disciplined, I think you called it a well-oiled machine. That seems to be another key to his success. When he was deciding last fall whether to run for president, there was a good moment in the book where it's driving him and his wife crazy, all this talk about being president, and they wake up one morning in the bed and she says, don't worry about us, we'll be okay if you want to go for it. And he seems genuinely confused at this point in his life about what to do. Yes?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of, and he was under a lot of pressure from the people who really played big roles in political campaigns, and that is the guys with the bucks, the big money people. They wanted Chris Christie to be in this race. And when he first talked to the family, they didn't really want him to do that. And I don't think he was keen on it either, because he is a family man. He likes to spend his weekends doing things with them.
And to his credit, he didn't think he was ready yet after 2 years in a state house. Go ahead.
Wasn't ready to run, yes. And so he basically came down and said, well, when it's all said and done, I don't want to spend 365 days a year, 24 hours a day running for this. I'm a young man. There'll be other opportunities for me. If they're not, okay, they're not. That's the way the world works. So I think, yeah, when all of a sudden she says, well, look, we'll take care of ourselves. You want to run for president, you go. Yeah, I think it was one of the more surprising things that happened to him that day.
So what do you think he wants now? VP on the Romney ticket, keynote speaker at the Republican convention? What do you think?
I think certainly he wants to be in the conversation. I think, and I think he wants to keep his options open. I don't know whether or not Romney is looking closely at him or not. You see some lists where the governor gets included, and then other times it says he's not a serious.
You guys make a pretty strong case for him being a very wise choice, I think.
Well, we talked to some people about it who know more about that than we do. And I think you can make that argument. And one of the things you have to realize about Christie is getting back to this U.S. attorney thing. And you mentioned it. They said, well, this guy doesn't have any experience in law enforcement. How could he possibly do a job like that? And he comes out of the office, and I doubt there'll ever be another U.S. attorney that can match his record. And if you look at his whole life that we put in the book there, he seems to be able to rise to whatever occasion that he wants to rise to. Now, the traditional vice president job where, what do they do? Occasionally they go to a state funeral when somebody dies. They cut a ribbon here or there. They go down to the Senate every once in a while. That's not Chris Christie. I think if he were to be somebody's running mate, he would have to have an understanding, look, I want a real job. I'll do whatever I have to do. I'll go to a state funeral, but I want a real job. I want to have a hand in this. I think that would have to be an understanding up front.
Let's assume that he's not part of the national ticket. We have a minute left. You think he's going to stand for re-election? You hear it both ways at the State House.
Who wins in 2012?
Let's say, for argument's sake, Obama wins in 2012. Does Christie run for re-election?
I don't think he does.
Why?
Because he intends to run in 2016 and knows that would be something that he would start in late 2014. Plus, you don't want to risk losing re-election.
What do you think?
I agree with Michael on that. He's got so many opportunities. He could be a part of an administration, let's say Romney won, but I don't think he really wants to do that. I think he wants to be in a job where he can make a difference. But he doesn't even have to be in politics. This guy is so popular. He could do television or syndicated radio or whatever he wanted to do.
I hope you'll do a little television here in this
Come and
studio
do this?
sometime, but we're out of time. Bob Ingle, Michael Symons, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for writing an interesting book.
Thank you.
We'll be back with another edition of On the Record next Saturday afternoon at 2 and Sunday morning at 10 for a detailed discussion of the current budget standoff at the State House. You can catch this weekend's Reporters Roundtable Saturday afternoon at 5:30 and Sunday morning at 9, and we'll hope to see you here next week.
Major funding for On the Record with Michael Aaron is provided by PSE&G, serving customers, strengthening the business community.